Kia ora, everybody. This is an absolute honour. I'm sitting here with Pete Evans. When I started the podcast, I had a bloke in Australia who actually I need to get on board because he's living in the wild in Australia at the moment. And he said, you should get Pete Evans on board. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's that chef guy, isn't it? And he said, yeah, he's got a podcast. It's really good. And sure enough, I went in and saw the back catalogue and I was absolutely amazed. Pete, before we get into it, what have you been up to this weekend, brother?
This weekend, well, actually, I had the good fortune today of exploring Waiheke Island from the water. I actually went salt water fly fishing for the very first ever time and caught a beautiful New Zealand snapper. I can never pronounce it. Kaiawai. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. We call them Australian sea salmon, and absolutely amazing. So I went out with this fella called Matt, awesome Kiwi, who's also a surfer, so we had a lot in common. And I was put onto him by a trout guide that I had down at Lake Taupo, who took me salt fly fishing in the streams, in the rivers, I should say. And he said you should try saltwater fly fishing. So that was my day today. And then to top it all off, my dear friend Manu is staying in 3 apartments down from where I am here in this apartment complex, and he's here with his wife and his mother-in-law and his daughter. So I brought the fish back to Manu, and him and his wife, beautiful wife and amazing mother-in-law, cooked me up the hottest, because they're from Malaysia originally, the hottest fish curry. And I've been struggling for the last half an hour, just like my head went numb, my arms went numb. I've been, like, if you've ever had serious hot chili, that was my experience. So I've had a pretty good experience today of catching my own fish, cooking it, or having someone else cook it. And it was great. And because I'd never been to Waiheke, I actually went onshore. I got the fishing guide to drop me off on the main beach, and I had this bag with these 2 big fish in them, and I took it up to the Oysterine, which is a famous restaurant on Waiheke, and I walked in there with my bare feet and my fish. I said, do you mind putting these on ice for me, because I'd like to eat some oysters, because I've heard that's what you do on Waiheke. So I managed to do that, and then they packaged it up for me, the fish that I caught, and so that was a perfect day. And this morning, actually, I woke up and there's a fella called Fraser. I'm going to get it for you now. I know this might sound a little bit long-winded, but this is important, I think. His name is Fraser Grutt, and he's a local Kiwi filmmaker, and he's got a project called 10,000 Dreams. So he's interviewing 10,000 people around New Zealand and around the world, and every day he's interviewing a different person, and for 30 seconds that person is to tell them their dream. And it's a 30-year project for him, and I mean, what a cool guy. So he contacted me last week. He said, mate, I'm doing this thing, would you like to be a part of it? I said, sure. Oops.
Yeah, that's all good, mate. And so where are we going to find that without stealing his thunder and asking what your dream was? Where do we find it?
Frog Productions, or Fraser Grutt. He's already launched. He's already put it online today, so you can check it out. One take is all I had, so I think I did all right. Nice. But you know, I love New Zealand. I'm having an amazing time here, and the people are warm, friendly. The food is amazing. The country is to die for, and my wife is an ex-Christchurch girl, and my great-grandparents came from Christchurch as well. And I said to the missus the other day, I said, I think eventually down the track in the next 10, 20 years, I'd like to end up probably around Gisborne, I reckon. And so I can surf, so I can fish, we can have the horses there, she can ride, and maybe do a bit of hunting as well.
Absolutely. I was going to say there's some bloody good hunting in that area as well. Also, you managed to meet up with a very good surfing buddy in Gisborne. I saw you catching some tubes with Maz Quinn. How did you shape up against Big Maz?
Well, my wife, Nick, is an old Kiwi, as I said. Well, she's not old, but she's an ex-Kiwi girl. And she's old mates with Maz. So I hooked him up, or she hooked me up with him on Instagram. And I just said, hey, bro, I was in New Plymouth and doing one episode of My Kitchen Rules, and I had 3 days or 2.5 days to get from New Plymouth over to Tauranga to do the next episode. And I have a hire car. I have a Prado that I've just hired from the local place, so I could put a couple of boards in and explore New Zealand while I'm here. And that's where I went trout fishing in Taupo, because I spent a night there. And then the next day drove down to down Mahia and then up to Gisborne. And then the next morning went surfing with Maz, and what a legend. And we surfed Waianui, which was a sensational little beach break with hardly anyone out and just beautiful waves. And he showed me around where there's the island that's got the left-hand reef breaks, and there's a right-hand reef break off there. And he gave me the local knowledge, and I can't wait to go back when there's a decent swell and tuck into some of those left-hand pits.
Yeah, and he might need to take you out to another underground island off Mahia where there's real serious big waves if the swells are coming in.
You never know your luck. And
yeah.
I mean, I've had some of the best waves of my life here in New Zealand over the last 2 years, and the locals are awesome and very welcoming out in the water. And I just surfed Gisborne last week with a fellow called Damo, who works for FCS, which is a surf brand. And he took me down to Dunedin, I should say. He took me around Dunedin and had a couple of surfs there. And the first surf we surfed with a couple of guys, and the second surf the next day, there was no one in the water for 20, 30 kilometres. And it was just the two of us surfing a 2-foot A-frame beach break that was offshore. So
nice. That's my type of waves. I'm very new to surfing and very much in the beginner mindset. I was on the beach break, like you say, at Christmas time, then come back a month later, the waves picked up a bit more, and I definitely felt like a rookie straight away. So it was good to feel silly again.
All of us feel like rookies from time to time, mate. So that's the fun thing about surfing, is that it definitely challenges you, keeps you on your toes. Pardon the pun, but it's an amazing sport and something that I'm very grateful to have learnt.
Nice, mate. Now, you spoke about oysters on Waiheke Island. I'm from Invercargill, and I saw you tucking into our most prized delicacy, although we've got a few down there, the bluff oyster. How does it compare? And I know the guys in Tassie claim their oysters, so what do you reckon?
Well, yeah, that's a very tough question, and it's something that I've been pondering very deeply over the last couple of years since I've been coming to New Zealand. And someone asked me today, actually, when I was at the Oyster Inn, and we had Coromandel oysters and also Waiheke oysters. So very similar, but they wanted to know which ones I like better, and the Waiheke ones were sensational. But the bluffs, Mano and I shared a dozen the other day down in Dunedin, first of the season, and we love them. They're bloody delicious. And generally with an oyster, I don't like to put anything on it, not even lemon, not salt, nothing. I like to just down the hatch. And I did that with the bluffies, and I like them like that, but I prefer to eat some of the rock oysters a little bit better plain down the hatch. But I ate at a Japanese place in Auckland yesterday, which is probably one of my favorite restaurants in the world. It's called Kokoro, Cocoro. And the chefs in there, like, Japanese just have such a the highest respect for seafood and for purity. And generally, I mean, you go there, that you eat sashimi, and sashimi's a little bit of soy or tamari, and sensational. But they had some bluffs on the menu, and they asked me, they said, do you want them natural or do you want them with our ponzu dressing? And because I've eaten a heap of them natural lately, I thought, you know what, let's break my habit, and I'll go with the ponzu. And I tell you what, it was sensational. So I reckon the bluffs for me now, something on there, whether it be lemon or some sort of dressing, but they're still amazing. They're just so meaty, but they're not creamy like other oysters. So I love them both. I love them all.
Nice. So, mate, we always ask people, and you know, we recognise you as Pete Evans, the chef, and some people might know you as Paleo Pete. But who is Pete Evans?
Cool. Put the shine the light on, shall we?
Yeah, let me be light.
Who was Pete? Human being.
Nice.
Best way to describe it was I'm having a human experience that is trying to remember that we're all connected, that we're all one energy, vibrating at a very high frequency throughout this universe all at once, and we're having a very unique experience in human form. And for the last 20 years, trying to shed as much of my ego, and when I say ego, my patterns that I've developed from a young age, from birth, if not before that, in the womb, that has given me my identity, or I have made my identity through fears or belief systems. So I'm very open-minded and quite curious as to our unique nature on this adventure in this one human existence that we have. And that might sound a little bit strange, but there's an experience that once you have it, an experience of non-duality, which means that you experience everything that ever has been and ever will be. And it is possible for human beings to experience this. And once you do experience that, or have this experience, it really can open up and change your perspective as to who you actually are. So, so Pete Evans is who you're talking to at the moment, but it is basically a character that I've developed over my lifetime. And as I said, over the last 10, 20 years, it's about really trying to strip back who that person is that is in there and who is existing here. And taking away the limiting self-beliefs or the negative belief patterns that we've inherited through culture, through our society, through our parents, our guardians, our education system, our media, because we definitely in the Western society live in a world of fear-based belief systems. So that has been what I've been curious about for quite some time, and even more curious about it lately. And I'm having a lot of fun with it, which is awesome.
Nice. This is something that I've sort of started to develop and I mentioned it a few times, as I start to develop my frontal cortex, I then also start to develop what are my thoughts actually about, and where do they come from. And you keep hearing about how you access that experience of non-duality and being free of your ego. And even today, listening to Tim Ferriss talking about, like you said, what happened to you in the womb, what happened to you when you were a child, and it was one of those podcasts where you sit and listen and you think, well, why did I do those things as I was growing up? And maybe there was something to it. And now, having just had a child, I'm really conscious of what are we creating and influencing for this new life, and you've got kids yourself. What have you been finding your thoughts and your behaviors and those patterns that come out of you, and what do you do to bring them back in again and go, no, that's not what I want to be saying?
Well, I think just self-awareness is such a valuable tool, and there's no right or wrong, good or bad. It just is. And you need to find, I believe, well, it was interesting. I sat around the table at My Kitchen Rules the other day because I'm here filming MKR New Zealand, and somebody, I forget what the question was, but they said, what is your goal, or what is your dream? I said, well, it is this. I said, it's about being content. And for me, contentment is sort of the goal. And I don't like to use the word goal, but it's the way that I would like to, and hopefully, be at every point of my existence, is contentment, or being in contentment. And it was interesting because there was a group of people around, and there was a radio hosts, talkback radio hosts, and they're usually quite funny. And they said, well, that doesn't seem to be something really to aspire to. And they said, that sounds a little bit boring. And I said, well, and someone said, don't you want to be happy? And I said, well, maybe you don't understand the context or the definition of being content. I said, if you look at the definition, it says peaceful happiness. And it's in our nature as energetic beings to experience love, to express love, to create, to share, to just to be. And peaceful happiness is basically, I believe, our default of how we operate. And if we come into this world not to expect it, but generally the role or the human nature is one of unconditional love, trust, and acceptance. A mentor of mine called Rudy Eckhart talks about it in his book, The Truth of Love and Fear. So every human being, depending on what the experience in the womb, but comes into the world believing that they're fully lovable, fully trusted, fully accepting, and have unconditional love. And throughout our experiences of life, that basically gets challenged by everyday things, you know. And then, as I said, throughout society, it also gets challenged, and you sort of end up finding your identity by not what to do. How do you please your parents in this particular point in time of the day? Is your dad or mum coming home from work and are they stressed? So do you need to watch what you say? Have you had an experience where your parents might have said little children should be seen and not heard? So has that become a belief for you that you have nothing to share vocally or verbally with the world that matters? You know, and the list goes on and on and on and on, because all of these things, even in class, what you're learning, you know, you might not understand how that is taught in that education system. You might learn through touch or feel or expression or hearing or whatever it may be. So you might get a C or a D on your report card, you know, which means a fail. So all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe I'm a failure in certain aspects of my life. And these build on those belief systems, even though they might be quite subtle and quite benign at the time. They do influence our identity of who we are. So that unconditional love, trust, and acceptance gets this layering of protection on us. So I'm not explaining it the best, but there's some bloody good, smart people that have worked their lives on these topics and subjects, and you can read their work and go to see them for sessions, and you learn to basically peel off these negative belief systems that can hinder us in our adventure of what I call the contentment of peaceful happiness, you know, and I quite like that term. So I don't know whether that answered it for you, but
absolutely, that's powerful, and yet took me back to, you know, one of those experiences that you can have, and it was floating, and you spoke about being marked down, and through university, getting an optometry degree, I was a B student, and that was sort of the realization that I came to in that floating tank, was that I've defined myself by a mark of a whole bunch of people's different grading system, when really I am me. I have my knowledge, I have my skills, and I can give that to the world, or I can be defined as somebody who's average, you know, and it's the choice that I was able to make, is that that's not who I am. So as I said, I knew you as the chef and on telly, and then when I looked through the back catalogue of Recipes for Life, is that what your podcast is called?
Yep.
Yeah, and I saw these wonderful people, and you just released the low carb, healthy fat cookbook as well. And for me, going on that journey was about firstly losing my grandfather to type 2 diabetes, and then seeing the correlation with things like polymyalgia, which is also in my family, and blood pressures and those sorts of things. And then working in the health sphere and seeing so many sick people come to me and going, what the hell is going on? You know, and you ask them, what are the medications? I don't know. Why do you take them? I don't know. What have you got? I'm not really sure. And that pure disconnection of health and well-being really motivated myself to not let that be my story. What is your story for striving towards, you know, like you said, that peaceful happiness and
I don't strive for it anymore.
yeah.
But I just let it be. But it's interesting, and I think labels are something we need to be very careful of, or people should be very aware of labeling themselves. And I'm seeing it a lot. I mean, I even saw it the other day at this lunch that I was at, that I was telling you about, the word of contentment. You know, straight away, this person identified themselves as a vegan.
Yeah.
Straight away, within, hi, my name's this, and I'm a vegan. I was like, whoa, okay. And I thought that was a very interesting label to put onto yourself. You know, what does that actually mean as a person, as an identity? Because the only label I think we should ever put on us is that we're human. And what is a human being? And, you know, and from that dietary perspective viewpoint, if you look at the definition of a human being, we're omnivores. And if you look at the definition of what an omnivore is, it's an animal that chooses or needs to eat plant and animal food. So omni. So we eat both types of food. So all of a sudden, the person putting their hand up and saying, I'm vegan, it's like, well, you've already taken yourself out of what a human being is. You know, you're trying to outdo what your species actually is and trying to outsmart it, you know. And I generally try to bring people back to being careful about how they label themselves. Like, I don't label myself as a paleo or a chef or this, even though my Instagram is Chef Pete Evans. But that we're just simple human beings, or quite evolved human beings, depending on what our belief systems are. And what you just said before, I met a fellow this morning, actually, before I went fishing, and after I did that video, I met a doctor, or actually a dentist, just down the road here, who wanted to catch up and have a meeting. His name's Dr. Hisham, fabulous dentist, and we had a really good chat before I went fishing for about half an hour. And like what you were saying, you said you've witnessed so many people with health issues, and they've come, or you've asked them the question, why are you taking that? Why are you taking that? And they're like, we don't know. That was what this guy was saying today, that there's so much faith in other people's expertise that you need to question everything from a common sense point of view, that if I take that pill or put that stuff onto my face or take that food into us, what are the repercussions of that? Because he was talking about toothpaste, for instance, and he's developed this amazing toothpaste that he doesn't call a toothpaste, and it's fluoride free, funnily enough. And this is a dentist, one of the top dentists that travels the world teaching other dentists. And we were having a discussion about fluoride, and he said, has the experiment worked? And I said, I don't think it has. He goes, no, it hasn't. And then we talked about the toothpaste dilemma, you know, and he said that, and I won't bore you here with the ins and outs of how the oral hygiene works, but he said most people brush their teeth with toothpaste, which actually is causing issues because it's not the right type of ingredients that we should be putting onto our gums. He said, we're so worried about our teeth. And he said, the most important part is actually our gum health, because that dictates, because we actually absorb all of those things from the toothpaste and whatever we eat into our mouth, which affects our gut and so on. He said, very few people actually brush their gums with the right type of ingredient, or ingredients, I should say. So I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's interesting because what you said was exactly the same thing as he said. People take things on the recommendation of somebody that may not actually know what they're talking about. Right? And we've seen it time and time again. We've seen the low-fat movement being pushed by our government dietary associations, and it's what's pushed in hospitals, daycare centres, in schooling systems, in everything. It's in our education that we should be eating a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet with vegetable oils. We're being promoted by that by the heart foundations. Now, the current research says that that is completely wrong. So we've had 30 or 40 years of misinformation coming through from people that we trust to give us the right advice, whether it's our dentists, doctors, governments. And I believe we need to take a step back again and actually go back to we're human beings. What do human beings need to be healthy? And once we start to take that very simple approach, we need good food, great food that is species appropriate. We need proper water that hasn't been tainted by any strange chemical concoction. We need to express ourselves truly, freely, openly, and without fear of judgment. So we can share stories, we can create, we can live our passions, whatever they may be, and for everyone it's different. We need to be able to connect socially with our loved ones, with our friends in a society. And we also need to, as human beings, like other animals, express ourselves through movement and also with the environment and the earth, you know. And once you start to think about these things, and also we need to sleep properly, and we also need to breathe properly, and we need to chew our food properly. And once you bring it back to these simple core truths or understandings of what it means to be a human being, then that's where the beauty lies. And food can become the most glorious part of the day when you're fueling yourself with something that you know is just completely nourishing every cell in your body. And when you are having a wonderful sleep and you've had 8 hours of sensational sleep, you wake up in the morning and very few things can beat that. And when you're interacting with someone on a heartfelt level where you're completely open and honest and loving, and whether that's with your children or with your parents or with your work colleagues or with your friends or with yourself, whether that's in an intimate relationship with another human being, romantically or sexually, you know, nothing can compare to that. And when you have done some exercise, and I don't like to use the word exercise, but an activity that you'd love to do, and for me it's surfing, or today it was fishing, you come out of that buzzing, or through that buzzing, and you just vibrating at a high level. And if you've done meditation or gone into the state of non-duality and really thought about where your thoughts are coming from, and are those thoughts serving me or are they hindering me? And you can really express your humanity in such a wonderful way. And to give you an idea of why I like doing what I'm doing is that's the end result of, because once you start seeing that change in once people start feeling that change in themselves, that's where the magic happens. So I never get really excited when somebody says, hey, listen, I'm cooking out of your books and I've lost 30 kilos and I'm off my type 2 diabetes medication, and you know, I could get back into my old shorts or my old dress or whatever it may be. That doesn't really excite me. What excites me is when they say, and guess what? I'm about to start painting again, or I'm about to start dancing again, or I'm going to go on this trip overseas that I never thought I'd be able to do, or I'm going to go climb that mountain, or I'm going to help out at the hospital, or I'm going to do this with my grandkids, or I'm going to do this. And that's what excites me about this, about humanity, is when people are functioning in a wonderful state of being, then that's where magic happens. That's where world-changing events can happen. And a world-changing event for someone might just be the ability to hug their grandchildren. You know, that could be a world-changing event for that person. Or it could be somebody that actually does change the world through an invention or a concept or a thought or an idea, you know. And it's very difficult for a lot of people to make their dreams a reality when they're tired, when they're in pain, when they're irritated, when they feel like the world is a very challenging place for them to be in, and that a lot of people have a belief system that the world owes them something, or the world isn't fair, or this, that, or the other, you know. And all that is the ego, which I call the identity, making up stories based on past experiences that are not really real at the big scheme of things. So again, off on a tangent, but it felt like the right way to go for that.
No, that was beautiful, mate. And there's nothing more powerful than witnessing vitality, like you say, this vibration that people give off when they've found themselves and are doing that thing they're passionate about. And I learnt the question of one of our previous podcast interviewees. His name was Yosefa, and one of the most powerful questions he was asked is, "What are you passionate about?" And this was when he was going to go to the States to play water polo. And especially now for my patients who are kids, that's the question I began asking them. And at first they're not sure of what passion means. And when you say, you know, what is it that you love? What is it that if you could choose anything, you'd do it all the time? And to see the light go into their eyes, you know, it's beautiful. And it's the hope from my perspective is that, like you say, so many things in your childhood influence the way that you go forward. And if that's a moment that they can look back on and go, when I was this old, I had this vision, and it was the same for me at 12 years old, seeing optometry and going, wow, this is amazing. I'd hope to pass that on. Now, you spoke about food being so powerful, and it's hard to frame it in a way that food is powerful, but it is fuel for our system. Now, our most downloaded episode was with Keegan Smith, who's I guess he's
I know Keegan, yeah.
Lovely, and he's been putting out your pemmican recipe, mate. It looks amazing, and I'll probably discussing it at the same time. Tell us about what is a pemmican, why is it so good, and how long can it fuel you for, and does it last? Like it looks amazing, mate.
All right. Well, thank you, and thanks, Keegan. I saw your Instagram post, and Keegan is expressing himself passionately. That's for sure. He's found what he loves to do. And I want to be very clear up front that pemmican or kraut or apple cider vinegar or whatever it may be, we should never put all our eggs, pardon the pun, in one basket. So I, again, go back to who are we? We're human beings. We're omnivores, plant and vegetables, basically, with meat and seafood, eggs. So whenever I'm designing or developing recipe books, I always have that concept in mind that's what I want to cover in the book. But a pemmican is basically, it's a traditional recipe from the Native American indigenous population there. And they would basically melt down the fat from one of their kills, and it could be from deer or bison, whatever wild animal they've got. So they would use the fat, and they'd render that down, and they'd mix it with basically ground up dried muscle meat. Now that could be a combination of offal, or it could be and normal fillets and rumps and whatever it could be. They would sometimes spice it, or sometimes even sweeten it with dried fruits as well, to make it even a little bit more palatable, or whatever was in season at that particular period in time. So it's a healthy fat slash healthy protein sort of slab or mixture that can be made in advance and basically even dried out. So it would be able to get them through the lean times when the hunting wasn't good or so be. I mean, most of our food that is beneficial for us has come about because of the necessity of finding ways to preserve food, and that's how sauerkraut came to be. It was cabbage, an excess of cabbage. How do we store it without refrigeration? We add salt to it, and that actually helps preserve it so that when we don't have vegetables, when it's snowing outside, we can actually access this to help us through those periods in time. So things like sauerkraut or kimchi in Korea, what we now know is they've got beneficial bacteria in there, which our guts love. And there's been fermented meats and vegetables and obviously fruits all around the world, and nuts and seeds and breads originally were made from fermenting different types of seeds and grains because it becomes easier for us to digest and actually has some sort of beneficial bacteria in there. So these types of foods have been important for our human evolutionary history. The breads probably in the more recent times, as well as fermented dairy. But for most of our evolutionary history, it was pretty much whatever we could gather, which would be roots and shoots and shrubs and berries and whatever fruit was available, which was usually very sour and for a short period of time, and whatever we could hunt. And whatever we could hunt, there could also be fermented vegetable matter inside the kill, and nothing ever went to waste, and the bones would always be used into a broth. So the idea behind pemmican was paying homage to the hunter-gatherer tribes, which is what our philosophy is based on, because again, we go back to what it is to be human. We've been hunter-gatherers more so than we've been agriculturalists. And the science shows that while we're hunter-gatherers, we actually had much better health, mental health, physical health, dental health, than what we have being agriculturists. So we created that pemmican recipe, and I'm glad that Keegan tried it out. And it's a delicious form of meat and fat protein that we can have on hand. You know, luckily these days there's paleo bars that are being made in America by Epic. In Australia, I think we've got the caveman or chief bars, which are basically a mince meat bar with a bit of dried fruit in them. They don't have the high fat content that a traditional pemmican does, but they're not bad.
Yeah, no, I love the guys at Epic and the way that they're looking after bison. It's pretty cool. Now, mate, you said about movement or doing some sort of activity that you love, and with surfing, you're out there in the sunshine, and I know you're one to get out in the morning and get those rays on you, try get the layers of clothing off and get it on your skin. But in your last podcast, you spoke with Simon Nelson,
Yep.
Scott Nelson, sorry.
Scott Nelson, yep.
Yeah, from Juve, and that's a way, you know, without using a term that's being bandied about, hack the vitamin D in the sunshine for your body and your skin. What would you describe the Juve and what are you getting out of using such a thing?
Well, it's an interesting concept because, again, if we bring it back to us as human beings, what do we need? Okay. Now, the world that we live in now is very different for us than what it once was when we were hunter-gatherers, obviously, and through our evolutionary history. I mean, there was no way that we, less than 100 years ago, would be sitting in front of a computer screen at this time of night with or maybe we had electricity back then with artificial light like this, but everything used to be by candlelight or by fire. And so the last 100 years, we have this society and this world that we live in that we now have 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi. I mean, where I am now, I'm in the center of Auckland in an apartment building. And if I go onto my Wi-Fi, there is 50 different servers that I could connect to. Now, I've done an interview with Dr. McCullough, Joseph McCullough, who I've done a book with called the Fat for Fuel Cookbook as well. And he's got a book coming out about EMF, electromagnetic frequency. And if that's the right terminology for EMFs, but he's got a book coming out talking about what that is doing to our bodies, because it's doing something. To say that it's not doing anything would be ignorant. How bad it is, well, you could read his book that's coming out and it'll blow your mind. So going into, it's taking a step back of what it means to be human. So we have this society now where the screens, the EMFs, the whatever radiation that we're exposed to, the pollution is probably the number one issue for us as far as ingesting and breathing in toxic chemicals. That's crazy. From how our food is packaged to plastics, and everything is having a consequence on us. Even here, having a shower in Auckland is having an effect on my body that it wouldn't have had previous to this society that we've had, you know. And I'm not saying that everything was rosy back in those days, but there's pluses and minuses for every time that we live in. But now we're living in existence where we actually, well, we do know what these things are doing to us to a degree, but not everybody does. So vitamin D is vitally important for us. And yes, I do. Today I probably spent 3 hours out in the sun fishing. I didn't use any sunscreen. I had a hat on, I had covered up, I had something around my neck and my ears. And then when I got home today, on the afternoon, I sat here from 4:30 to 5:30 watching the surfing from the Gold Coast, the surfing comps on, and I sat outside in my undies on the balcony. So if anyone was sitting over there in the car park, they would have had a good view. But I got an hour of sunlight all over my body except for one part. But usually if I'm at home, everything's off, everything's exposed, at least for half an hour a day, because vitamin D is vitally important. And once upon a time, in hunter-gatherer societies and our evolutionary history, we would be outside absorbing that vitamin D. So that is something that is unconditional or non-negotiable with me, is every single day I will attempt to get outside and get that onto my skin. Even if I'm at My Kitchen Rules for a 14-hour day, we have 40 minutes lunchtime usually, and I will strip off into a pair of shorts, go sit outside in the car park while everyone else sits inside the studio, 80 of them eating their lunch. I'll strip off and I'll lie there in the sun. And it's not to get a tan, it's just to get vitamin D and to feel bloody good, because then I go back into the studio under these artificial lights with so many different Wi-Fi devices and electricity in that room, that's my chance of letting my body try to experience something natural for a short period of time. So going into the Juve light, it's a infrared red light therapy, and it's got far and near. I believe that there's actually 3 different modes, I believe, with the Juve setup. And for anyone wanting to know, I've got the podcast under Recipes for Life with Scott Nelson. Juve is JOOV. Amazing concept here. And it isn't for vitamin D. What it is done is it's for our mitochondria or ATP cell production. So it can basically help with our cellular integrity and health by spending a little bit of time in front of these infrared and red light therapeutic lights. And basically that mimics part of what the sun does, not completely, obviously, but if you're not getting enough sun exposure, this is probably the next best thing that you could do on a daily basis. And I've still got one at home and I use it every day for 5 minutes one side, 5 minutes the other. I've got a big wall hanging one, and I do that as well as going into the sun. And it helps with our collagen, it helps with inflammation in our bodies. And it's interesting because over the next few months, we're looking at setting up a studio in Sydney and then different parts of Australia and hopefully New Zealand, where we will have a studio set up with a few different of these modern technological devices that help us deal with our modern day world that we live in. So it sounds strange that we've got these devices at the moment. Like, we'll have a cryotherapy machine, which is a machine that you hop in for 3 minutes and basically it drops you get a very cold experience, a la Wim Hof, or jumping into a plunge pool that's very cold. Because that is fantastic, again, for inflammation, but it's great for people that have many different issues in their life. So the combination of these body hacking devices, such as infrared sauna, I have one of these at home, and we have them pretty much every single day that we can. We'll spend 30 minutes in an infrared sauna. We take the computer in and put it outside and watch a show, or meditate. And again, that is to help us detoxify from the heavy metals that we absorb through our breathing and through certain foods that we might have consumed. That is a detoxification solution for us by getting it out through sweat, through infrared saunas. So we also will have a float tank and meditation pod, again, to help people get to that state of really beautiful relaxation so that their bodies can go into a state of healing. So all of these devices, like the red light therapy, helps us to get into a state of repair and healing and de-stressing from our modern day lives. And 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, we wouldn't have needed these machines. But we're now at a state where the population is so sick and the advice that they're getting is so wrong that this can add or help to the solution. But, you have to look at it from a whole package point of view. And we'll go back again to say food, water, sleep, rest, connection. You can do all of this, but if you don't love yourself, or you can't relate to other people or connect to other people, or you have a job that you hate going to, then that can create disease, no matter how much paleo food or organic food you eat or how much sleep you get. You have to take a multifaceted approach to health. And again, don't put all your eggs into one basket, that I'm just going to eat well and not look at my emotional well-being. And you can't just look at your emotional well-being without looking at your diet. And you can't just look at your diet without understanding that our bodies need vitamin D. And how do we actually access that in our modern day? And how do we limit or vastly reduce the amount of EMF exposure that we have? I travel with an earthing sheet and an earthing pillowcase wherever I travel, and most people could think that's crazy, but I've gotten to that point where I don't really care what other people think about me, because I'm looking after this human experience, because we only get one shot. And I've seen so many sick people in my time, and that is not where I want to be. I've already had a bet with my daughters that I will be surfing when I'm 100 years old. And you look at someone like Kelly Slater, who's still competing on the world tour, and he's 45, 46, and he'll probably compete till in his 50s. That's competitive surfing with 18-year-olds. So there's no reason that we cannot live for a very long time, but also with our minds working properly or at their optimum capacity. And that can even be developed. There's people like Jim Quick out there that are developing these brain training techniques. People like Dave Asprey from Bulletproof, who is, my wife and I visited his 40 Years of Zen, which is one of his businesses in Seattle, Washington. We chose to spend New Year's Eve during doing a 5-week intensive course of neurofeedback. Why did we choose to do that? Because that's what we like to do together. We want to ensure that we had our brains mapped. We found out where there was deficiencies in certain parts of connectivity from left side to right side, and also where injuries have happened. I've had a fractured skull from being hit by a surfboard when I was 14, and that appeared. My wife had hit her head as well as a child, and that came up on the brain scan. So let's work out ways that we can improve the connections that aren't firing properly. Let's work out ways that we can keep evolving and keep improving without being fanatical about it or obsessed about it. But if there's the option of potentially doing, I just downloaded Lumosity, which is a brain training thing, which is basically free, that I'm going to do for 5 minutes a day, because it's either that or scroll through Instagram, and I'll still scroll through Instagram, but I'll do that as well. And that will hopefully add to the work that I can do into the future.
Absolutely. Now, that ties perfectly with my next question, because I know you get plenty of good fats in and things like coconut oil, and you just confessed to doing brain training. So what is a characteristic of Pete Evans as a 5-year-old that you think shows up today, mate?
Well, and this is one of the things that I'm most fascinated about, because I don't have a good grasp of my childhood memories. And that was one of the things at 40 Years of Zen that Dave Asprey's clinic set up. They said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, because my childhood memories are basically non-existent. So I want to be able to make sure that I can retain memories. And obviously there's certain reasons that I have chosen to shut certain things out from that period of my life. And to definitely make sure that I don't repeat any of those occurrences that happened with my parents, because I'm a parent now myself, and my children are 11 and 13. And the intention is to be a wonderful role model for them, but also to step out of the way and let them develop into their own unique, beautiful selves, whatever that may be. So my 5-year-old, I was extremely scared. I was extremely shy. I wouldn't say I was a happy kid, because the environment I was in at that time was not one of happiness. That's for sure. There was no contentment there. So I have, from the age of 20, probably about the age of 20, well, actually 19, I did my first real work on myself of self-awareness by reading an Anthony Robbins book. And I read the book and I was blown away. I was like, geez, why don't they teach you this stuff at school? And then I read his next book, and then 3 months later, I heard he was in Australia, and I was in Melbourne, and he was teaching in Sydney. So I flew up to Sydney, did a 3-day course, changed my life. And that wasn't a fart, that's just me moving on my chair. And, and from that moment in time, as a 19-year-old, that opened my eyes as to, I don't need to live in a world of fear, pain, shyness, being intimidated by others. And it's been a long process to get to a point where I am now, and I'm still growing. That and it's been 25 years now of self-searching and self-investigation, and working with different professionals from all walks of life, whether they're energetic therapists, whether they're behavioral therapists, whether they're kinesiologists, spiritual workers, you name it. I've searched them out, and I'm always curious as to what we can uncover and unlock that has created this identity, because I'm 40, turning 45 this year, and I'd have to say I'm the happiest or most content that I've ever been in my life. I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my life. I'm in a fantastic, loving relationship with my wife. I've got most amazing, beautiful children that inspire me. And I can only see that improving each and every year as I, again, peel off another layer and get to know and understand what it is to be a human being.
Nice. And so are you finding that optimism is starting to bloom the more you learn about yourself and tap into what it is to being a human?
I don't know whether I have optimism. I don't have pessimism. I don't really have optimism either. I don't use those words really to define who I am or what the future holds, because we only have now. So you can only ever be, you can choose to be however you want to be in this moment. And that's all you can. You can't say, well, in 5 years' time, I'm going to be different. You know, I said it before that I'm growing, but I'm growing in this minute. I'm growing in this moment, you know, by just this opportunity to share that you've given me the chance to do. And I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Likewise.
Because even this experience here is opening myself up in another way and helping me to reflect about the journey, you know, and the journey is always just now. And there's a beautiful podcast I did with a fella called Martin Ball. So if you're interested in someone that's very eloquent at explaining the idea of being human, and he's written a book called Being Human, and I highly recommend people read that if that's of interest to you. His name's Martin W. Ball. He's a adjunct professor of religious studies from Oregon over in the States, and he's written quite a few books, fiction and non-fiction. He's an expert in entheogenic work, so the use of different psychedelic plant medicines and earth medicines, and he's definitely someone that can help explain this in a beautiful way. So check out his work, and also listen to the podcast that I did with him, because it's very heart opening.
No, it was very good. I can even image when I was listening to that. I was driving down to Rotorua to look at some deer. There's some stag sales on down that way, and yeah, it made for what is a beautiful journey. It made for a enlightening journey as well. So no, I could definitely reiterate how good that podcast is. Mate, you've touched on ways of enhancing your life, and you've sort of tapped into that further again. You said you're going to look at these centers, but in this supplement realm, you've got the collagen. You touched on vitamin D being important for collagen. What is it that you think is so important about this type of protein?
Again, I'm very careful that I watch my words to say that all you need for your life is this collagen powder, because that would be a lie on my behalf, you know, and I'm not into lying to anybody, myself in particular. So, but I've worked with some wonderful brothers or brother-in-laws called the Gel Pro brothers in Australia, and they make the best gelatin and collagen powders. They're very, and their story is beautiful. If you want to get them onto the podcast, rheumatoid arthritis. Najib is one of the partners and one of the brothers, and he basically put himself into remission from rheumatoid arthritis through the research that he did, which led him to Western A Price and paleo, and then the benefits of bone broth and collagen and gelatin. So he turned his passion through necessity into a business. And so I was buying the products, and we've become partners in the Pete Evans range of ingredients or products that are out there, and we've released a few different collagen blends. And so collagen is just fantastic. I mean, and we've got some bone broth blends as well. So these I see as additions to a diet, of a human diet, as being vegetables and meat or seafood or eggs. So once you fill your plate with vegetables and you have a side of well-sourced meat or seafood or eggs, then and maybe some fermented vegetables, I always encourage people, if they choose to have some broth. You know, a couple of cups a week would be fantastic. Some people take a cup a day. I generally have one every day if I can. And what bone broth has is going back to traditional societies around the world and cultures, and every society has a version of soup or broth, is because we would hunt an animal, whether it be out of the ocean or on land, and we wouldn't want to waste anything. And what do you do with the bones? You don't waste them. You put them in a pot and add some water, and you boil them up, and you create this wonderful tasting meat tea or fish tea or broth, as they call it. And from that, as far as it used to be a way of using up all the food, so then we could put in whatever vegetables or herbs or shrubs or whatever it was that we found, or spices, and then more meat, and then extend that into the village. So we'd always have some sort of food. What we've learned over the last 50, if not more years, the work of somebody like Sally Fallon, who wrote the book Nourishing Traditions, and prior to that was Weston A. Price, who was a famous dentist who wrote the book Nutritional and Physical Degeneration, who studied ancient societies or cultures from around the world. He noticed that they all boiled up animal bones. So from that, now we know that what's in the animal bones and skin is that there's collagen, there's gelatin, there's calcium, there's glucosamine, there's magnesium, there's all these different things that you would find in a multivitamin that are in their natural form. And our bodies love absorbing foods in their natural form. They don't really like synthetic or artificial supplements as such. It's always best to have them in a whole food form. So if you can't have your broth daily, or you don't like the smell of putting a broth on in your house because it stinks out the family, and I understand that, then there's solutions to that. So there's gelatin-based solutions. So you can buy some gelatin powder from grass-fed, grass-finished animals to make gelatin-based desserts or sweets or treats or whatever you may be, savory things as well. Or there's collagen powders that we've created that you can add to your coconut milk in the morning. So you're getting the benefit of one couple of parts of that broth basic formula, which is the collagen, and getting that. And if you mix it with your coconut cream, like this morning, I made myself I've got some the chocolate collagen powder that I bought over here to New Zealand. I mixed that with some coconut cream, and that was my breakfast. That was it. Then I went out till 2 o'clock, and then I had my lunch. And but that actual collagen drink mixed with the fat was satiable, and it was delicious, and it benefits your gut health. So collagen benefits your skin, it benefits your hair, benefits your nails, benefits your gut. Gelatin benefits your gut as well. And we've got the bone broths, and I have that every day or two here as well. And I had it for dinner tonight. Actually made some chopped liver that I took over to Manu's that we had before the fish, and I put the broth into that. So these types of food supplements are, I see them as a backup or a solution for people that are traveling or don't feel like making a big batch of broth. So it's funny because I'm not a huge fan of supplements or putting these things out there, but we're focusing on things that actually do a job and have a purpose for people's health and well-being in this day and age. I mean, our first supplement we did was grass-fed and finished beef liver capsules. And the reason for that is because once upon a time, everybody would be eating organ meats. You know, going back 100 years, that would be part of a weekly diet for most cultures, even westernized cultures. They would. It's funny. I watched Fargo recently, series 2, I think it was, or series 3, and it was set in the 50s or 60s, and a little small town in America, the Midwest, and they had a butcher shop. And in front of the butcher shop, they had all the prices and the billboards for all the meat that they were selling back in the 60s or the 50s in Fargo. And nearly everyone was awful. It was pork liver. It was beef liver. It was kidneys. It was marrow bones. You go past a butcher shop this day and age in America or Australia or New Zealand, you don't see those types of foods anymore. So we've created liver capsules of all the bloody things in the world, you know, and the reason for that is because, number one, people don't know how to cook it. People don't even know how to find it anymore. And number 3 is they don't like the taste of it because they've never been brought up with it. So, and it's probably the most important food. That and oysters I always put as the two things that, if there are such a thing as superfood on the planet, it's oysters or shellfish and also organ meats. And they're usually the two things that people really dislike eating in this day and age. So we've got an oyster supplement coming out later this year as well. So we're trying to give people a solution for living in a society that we have lost the connection of how to eat as well and how to appreciate certain foods. Unfortunately, I'm sticking them in a capsule for people to take, but at least it'll do the job. But I'd rather you eat a piece of liver or suck down some oysters.
Nice, mate. And another one of those foods that I've just recently become acquainted to is sardines, and absolutely love it. Feeling good. Now, mate, when you finally got it out to us here in New Zealand, the magic pill, I sat down with my partner, who we can see running around in the background doing an amazing job, and we watched it, and we were pleasantly relieved because we've sat down and watched the vegan propaganda movies and cringed. And the magic pill was simple. It like you say, there weren't any lies told. It was the story took it right back to that being a human and what is food and what is the relationship. So what was the motivation for getting behind that film? And obviously you highlighted a number of amazing people in the world like Jason Fung and Nina Tai Schultz. I can't quite say her name right. Andreas on felt, what was behind getting that film out there, and it's so good to see you continuing to promote it and doing so well.
Yeah, it's great question. So if we go back about 5 years ago, I adopted this way of eating probably 7 years ago after my wife was reading Nora Gagaudis's book called Primal Body, Primal Mind. And she sort of said, Pete, you might want to read this. It's got some pretty amazing or profound words in it. So I read it. I was amazed. Contacted Nora as I do. Hey, Nora, I'm a fella from Australia. I love your book, and tell me more. And from that led on to, I guess, really wanting to understand this, and it felt like something that I was passionate and curious to pursue on a personal level first and foremost for myself and my family, but also on a professional level, because I realized that it had to do with food. And I've been working with food for 20 years. I mean, these two hands have cooked 1 million dishes in their time for other people. And it's amazing because chefs, as a general rule, no one has taught us about health and nutrition, or what actually is true health and nutrition. And I'd gotten to the point in my career where I felt like I have pretty much learned a lot about how to make delicious food, whereas this was an opportunity for me to start at the basics again and actually really, I guess, have a large growth opportunity to delve into health and nutrition from a chef's point of view. And I looked around the world to see what other chefs were doing this, and there was nobody that I could find at the same profile that anyone was known for. You try to name a healthy chef advocate out there. I mean, Jamie Oliver was probably the closest, but the information that he's putting out there isn't exactly up to date and isn't exactly going to get people to be at their optimum. It'll help them get from bad to not as bad, but it's still heavily carbohydrate based, it's heavily grain based, and gluten based, which can be problematic for people with autoimmune disease. Eating that way still can cause type 2 diabetes, and it's not going to reverse type 2 diabetes. So, and I take my hat off to him, and I think he's an amazing advocate for what he has done. But the next step up from that, I couldn't see anybody doing it. I was like, well, this is strange, but also an opportunity to help get this message out with my profile. So the magic pill came about because I first made a series called The Paleo Way, which was 8 episodes, which is on iTunes now. And that was a cooking program with a lot of these interviews with world's leading experts on farming, on health. So we interviewed Harvard professors, we interviewed some of the speakers that you've mentioned already before, neurologists, cardiologists, dietitians, nutritionists, naturopaths, you name it. I wanted to interview them. And the funny thing is, they're all basically saying the same thing, all from different points of view, or all from different walks of life, I should say, or all from different educations and professions. But they're all saying the same thing. Eat a lot of vegetables, low carbohydrate ones, add some meat, not too much, or well-sourced seafood, and fix your gut up with some fermented foods and some broths. Pretty much tick, 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 tick for all of these people, health professionals that were actually getting results. And that was always the key determining factor. Let's speak to the people that are getting results. Let's not speak to the so-called experts that aren't getting results. Let's speak to the people that may not be as well known, but are actually showing that if you do this and this and this will be the outcome over and over and over and over again. So Paleo One Series 1 came out. I decided to do another series called Paleo Way Series 2, which was another 8 episodes of cooking, and each episode would feature 3 or 4 recipes and different people that had healed themselves through the power of food. And at the end of all of that, and these are self-funded and out into the world of streaming devices now. At the end of all that, I said to my wife, I said, I think that we should turn this into a movie, a documentary, because there'd been some documentaries made and none of them had, again, hit the nail on the head in my opinion. And there were a lot of movies coming out that were just so off the mark. You know, I'd seen the one that was promoting vegetarianism for kids. I was like, whoa, you know, this isn't the right way forward. So I spoke to the director who I worked with for The Paleo Way, who's also my director and producer for an American series that I do as well called Movable Feast. So I host a TV series in America every year that's on PBS, and I cook paleo food, but I work with America's top chefs and they cook whatever food they want to do. And Rob Tate is the producer on that. So he works with me on Movable Feast for the last 6 years. And I employed him to put together the Paleo Way Series 1 and 2. And he was the perfect person for it because he was a skeptic. He was a classic New York film producer, lovely guy, like we're good mates, but he came in as a skeptic. He's not a skeptic anymore, that's for sure. So we had a conversation. How do we turn some of this material that we've got so much good material, into a documentary? So we had the opportunity to film with the Indigenous Australians up in Arnhem Land, the Aboriginals, with a charity organisation called Hope for Health, which takes Indigenous Aussies, puts them back onto their basically diet of meat and vegetables, or seafood and vegetables, and they do that for 2 weeks. So we had the opportunity to film that. And then Rob had some friends and family members that were open to changing their lifestyle because they were so sick. And he documented them as well. And one thing led to another, and more people through different doctors came about, said, maybe you want to follow this person that wants to clean up their act as well. So from that, we put together the human stories, which we needed in there to have the emotion and actually to show what can happen in a short period of time when we start to fuel our bodies properly. And we also interviewed some great people like Jason Fung, as you mentioned, and others. And we also had the opportunity to film the Tim Noakes trial, Professor Tim Noakes in South Africa, who was up on charges for neglect, for advising parents to feed their children a low carbohydrate, healthy fat approach. So that worked out wonders for us. And we also had Nina Tschultz, who was very valuable in telling the story of how we actually got to our really messed up dietary guidelines, which are still in place around the world, and why that was based on not just one lie, but many lies. So we had the perfect storm of people getting healthy, great interviews, perfect science, and then also the trial of a respected professor for advocating people to eat meat and vegetables. It was, and this was our first movie we've put together, and it won't be our last. The next one's going to go into the more human side of what we were talking about before, expanding consciousness and actually understanding who we are. So it won't have anything to do with food, the next one, which is probably more of the magic pill than the food one. And we called it the magic pill because Jason Fung said that there is no magic pill. We're searching for one. And originally we were going to call the movie Food is Medicine, but just as we're about to register it, I went online and somebody has just released another documentary called Food is Medicine. So I was like, wonder what we can call it. And I was watching the cuts as they were coming through, and what Jason said was, there is no magic pill. I was like, that's the perfect title for this film, because the magic pill is basically in front of us. It's always been in front of us. It's just understanding that we're human beings. What do we need to do to reconnect to that amazing species that we are? And I'm not going to repeat myself, but that was why I thought the movie just makes so much sense. And the artwork conveys that, it's the pill popping open with vegetables and meat. And, if I could, I would have put the sun in there and some stretching and some love hearts and all of that. But it's a food-based film, so we kept it around food, even though it's quite emotive.
It was definitely emotive, and like you said, that Aboriginal culture, it does bring a tear to your eye, and the work with the ketogenic diet and those with autism, again, it brought a tear to your eye. It was fantastic. Now, mate, conscious of the time, it's getting very dark, and I know you're I don't like using the word busy, but you probably are allowed to have that again title. But what would be something that you'd like to leave people with? I know on your show you asked them their 3 ingredients for life. What's something that you'd love for people to know about? And I think you've probably touched on it in terms of contentment.
Yeah, I try not to advise people what to do or how to feel or who to be, because it's everybody's gift to discover and to share for themselves. So I know a lot of people have trouble changing or have fears or doubts about what they can achieve, fear of failure. So my suggestion is, if people are interested, is that once you decide that you want to do something, generally the answer will come to you, and of how to go about it, or something will come along, a coincidence, or what they call synchronicity or synchrodestiny, as Deepak Chopra talks about. But once you want to make a change, then, and I don't want to get corny here, but generally the universe, and it's not the universe, it's actually you, end up opening up to the possibility of what you're asking for. And if you're asking for change of yourself, then yourself will create an opportunity for that to happen. Now, you don't have to do all of this on your own. And one thing that I am passionate about doing is working with people that are experts in their field. So my podcast, for instance, I ask experts in their field to tell me about their lifetime experience or their work or what they want to share. So for me personally, as I said, I visit with people that are experts in their own field. So for instance, if my body's feeling like it's out of alignment, I will go and see a physical therapist, and that might be a chiropractor. It could be a Bowen therapist. It could be a masseuse. It could be any number of different physical therapeutic experts because I'm not that person. But I won't again put all my eggs into one basket with one philosophy or style. I will change it up from time to time. And if I'm having a challenge with an emotional issue or belief system or thought, or I'm stuck on something, then I will go and find an expert that can help me unlock the answer in me. We always have the answers ourselves, but there's sometimes, because of our ego, we lock it away very well for us not to even find the key. So there are trained people out there, and I'll give you an example of some of these types of people that you might like to investigate. And for number one, it could be by yourself as meditation or self-reflection. You could visit somebody that I have had tremendous work with is a practitioner that does neuro-emotional technique, which is NET. And basically that helps to unlock, or first it serves to find out what the limiting belief system or pattern that you have around a particular topic or item or idea that you have. It could be that you're not getting along with somebody at work. So you visit somebody like this and you say, I'm not getting along with so-and-so. And they go, okay, well, let's find out what the emotion is. So they'll tap in and they'll go, is it anger? Is it resentment? Is it jealousy? Is it frustration? The list will go on and on and on. And your body, through the form of kinesiology or muscle testing, will present an answer. And it might be jealousy. And from that, you delved a little bit deeper and go, okay, so why am I jealous about this person? Is it because this? And it'll end up being that they're being heard or listened to and you're being ignored or whatever like that. And through that technique, they'll bring it back to a period in your life previously where it may have occurred first to set you up with this belief system. So this person's not doing anything wrong to you. You're just believing that you're not good enough, which creates jealousy. Okay. So they might go back, and when you were 5 or 10 and you're trying out for the football team and you're the last one to get picked, and all of a sudden it sets up that I'm the least important in this group, blah, blah, blah. So you might be experiencing that in work. Someone might get a promotion. So you might go back into that feeling of I'm the least important in this group. So neuro-emotional technique works out to first identify the issue that you're having, or the belief that you're having at this particular time with this particular situation. Then through the technique, it finds out what the original cause of that pattern was for you emotionally and goes about clearing that pattern. So then you become neutral, because again, neutral is peaceful happiness, contentment. So you don't get, being neutral is a wonderful way to be, so that you're not reactive to a situation, because a lot of the time the situation actually has nothing to do with you, but you think it has to do with you. So, and that's just one of the types of therapists out there. There's also psychotherapists, there's life coaches, there's neurofeedback specialists. There's a whole host of different modalities out there. And again, I wouldn't put all my eggs into a basket, but explore what is out there that is in your realm or your budget, or there'll be some great things online that are free, possibly, that you can explore. So we've talked about movement. We've talked about emotional well-being. As far as consciousness, meditation is a great thing, or maybe yoga and movement, or different types of breath work. And then obviously there is the food side of things. So again, bringing it back to all those different pillars of what makes us human, and really looking at what works for people in a long-term sustainable situation. And that is where I'd say be very, very careful where you get your information from, because I was I followed a vegan vegetarian lifestyle for many years, about 20 years ago, and it made me really, really sick. But I felt good for the first year. Then it was a downhill spiral, and I didn't want to give it up because it was a belief that I had that this was the right way for me to interact with the world, and no harm to animals and no harm to the planet. But I was so convinced that that was the way forward that I let my health suffer. So for anyone that's listening, and it was interesting because one of the guys I met today, he goes, "Oh, my 17-year-old daughter's going to turn vegan." And I was like, "Oh, for a female, that can be have disastrous effects long term, So, and I'm not here to attack anything, but again, come back to what is the best for us as human beings in this one experience that's sustainable for the planet and for our own health, and that people have worked out how to do properly." And if you look at it from that point of view and you use common sense, then you can achieve anything that you want to, or not.
Yep.
There's nothing to achieve, really. I through the work that I've done with having non-dual experiences or non-duality, is that this experience is a gift, and it's also a game, and it's here to be played however you want to play it. And there's no winners or losers. It's just how you react to this reality or this game or this illusion that we call life, and to have fun with it, and just to, again, be content and peacefully happy.
Lovely,
with
man.
all the madness that's going on around.
Absolutely. No, and I'm enjoying witnessing your human experience, and I'm sure plenty of my audience will as well. And I hope to share plenty more human experiences with people. And I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for coming on board. I'm truly enlightened with that conversation. It was massive, and I'm sure my audience will appreciate it as well. Thank you.
Cheers, brother. Thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody. And if you want to know any more, jump onto our podcast as well. And
Absolutely. We'll share that in the notes, mate. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Cheers.